Months into the Russian-Ukraine war, and every attempt at stopping the conflict has gone nowhere. After being invaded by Russian military forces and hit by airstrikes across the country, the government of Ukraine has been left figuring out how it will progress into the future. With over thousands of fatalities and millions of people displaced, if the government of Ukraine wants to be a powerful country, it needs to change how it operates at a fundamental level. President Zelenskyy said in early April how he intends to use the model of Israel as a blueprint for how to shape the future of Ukraine. With a population more than 4 times smaller and vastly less territory, the Jewish state at first seems like an unlikely contender as a model for the second largest country in Europe. Yet considering the regional security threats Israel faces, as well as its highly mobilized population, the two war-torn countries share more in common than it may seem at first glance. Like Israel in its early wars, Ukraine appears to have fended off an acute existential threat. But the war is far from over. By adapting their country's mindset to mirror parts of Israel's approach to chronic security challenges, Ukrainian officials can tackle critical national security challenges with confidence and build a similarly resilient state. By learning certain aspects of Israel's blueprint, it can ensure that Ukraine can have a long-term road to establishing its sovereignty. A key element that has been a part of Israel since its independence in 1948 is its ability to have the entire population playing a role in the country. With a mandatory conscription law and its regulated conscription of women, it marches to the beat of its own drum in world affairs. The army carries out important social and economic functions, and it serves as a symbol of Israeli strength. The army cuts across ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic boundaries, oftentimes taking interest in the education of new immigrants and marginal sections of Israeli society. Doing so allows the learning of basic skills and the eventual assimilation into the army. The Israeli army is very much a people's army, with there being many contacts between the IDF and wider society. Due to these contacts, there has been considerable civilian influence on army life. Aside from basic training in certain courses, the atmosphere in the IDF is generally informal. Only the highest officers are referred to as commander, and everyone else is referred to on a first-name basis, as in other sectors of Israeli society. Most orders are given as directions, and disagreement and discussion of such directions are not uncommon. A common purpose unites the citizenry, making them ready to endure shared sacrifice. This idea of self-defense animates Israel's security doctrine. It's that Israel will defend itself by itself and rely on no other country to fight its battles. The tragedies of Jewish history have embedded that lesson deep in the nation's soul. Ukraine's own trauma, forced to fight alone against a larger aggressor, reinforces a similar idea. Israeli citizens realized early on that a state's military power depends also on its scientific and technological capacity. From a war-torn nation struggling for survival and lacking natural resources, the biblical land of milk and honey has become a technological powerhouse which has seen economic growth. After gaining independence, technology in general acted as a vital agent of change in the war-state relationship, and eventually the ripples of this change spread throughout society. You have only to look at the technologies today that are used around the world that Israel had a hand in making. From the development of the phone to the USB flash drive, Israel's status as a global tech hotspot came out of necessity to defend itself. For decades, Israel was an international basket case, with no one being willing to send aid of any kind. In the early years of its independence, Israel was viewed by neighboring Arab countries as occupiers in a land that was not rightfully theirs. This aggression manifested into the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, with the newly established country of Israel fighting alone, without any help against Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. In terms of manpower, Israel was outmatched and relied on their own skills to develop and build their own weapons. This led to the creation of the Uzi submachine gun, which helped Israel in their early wars and is now used today across the world. Israel's eventual victory in the war came from the Israeli citizens' need to reestablish the claim to their homeland, even if it meant life or death. This ideology to fight for their right to independence manifests in the technology it produces today, with the recent use of the Iron Dome being used as a form of protection. While fighting the Russian invasion, Ukraine must look to sustaining its scientific base and information technology sector to ensure its future security and economic prosperity. Since the invasion, Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation has pivoted to take the lead in cyber defense. Many Ukrainian software developers have mobilized into an IT army of several thousand strong that has begun targeting Russian institutions. These efforts play an important role in sustaining Ukraine's technology sector as it seeks to position itself as Europe's IT hub. With over a reported 7 million people displaced and a humanitarian crisis unlike any other in its history, Ukraine will begin a massive restructuring over the next 10 years. Zelensky stresses that his vision for Ukraine's post-conflict future includes having armed forces in all institutions, supermarkets, cinemas. There will be people with weapons. In Israel, images of armed civilians, settlers, and soldiers are commonplace, and the government invokes security frequently. Zelensky, who is Jewish, has on several occasions stressed the importance of maintaining close ties with Israel, which he hailed as a model for Ukraine. This should not come at the cost of neglecting to maintain democratic institutions. Israel continues to face the challenge of ending its conflict with the Palestinians in ways that ensure both its security and the Palestinians' self-determination. But within Israel itself, a constant focus on security hasn't prevented the upholding of core democratic institutions and practices. Zelensky is aware of this tension, which will require constant maintenance, but also that democracy is a prerequisite. An authoritarian state is impossible in Ukraine, he said. With a democratic institution, it will allow the seeds of a civil society to develop.